So I think it's Saturday, and no, it's not. It's Friday, January the 20th. But you know, days and time really don't matter out here. You can probably hear the wind screeching through a small acacia bush just behind me. I'm sitting in the middle of a gravel plain with a blanket over my head, trying to kill the wind so I can get this podcast out. Because the wind has swung around from the north to the south, the temperatures have risen, and life is a bit more comfortable after the cold nights of the last 48, 72 hours. So first of all, a quick update on the team. I am progressively better. Anna, poor girl, is now on a dose of antibiotics from the local pharmacy and still cannot speak very well at all, but she has a bit more energy about her too, so hopefully in a couple of days she'll be on the road to recovery. Alan and Reem are obviously made of much tougher stuff than Anna and I, but we're all in good spirits. It's day 5. We're kind of a third of the way through the second leg of our journey from Riyadh to Jeddah, and you know, the standout from yesterday really has to be the beautiful granite scenery that Reem and I walked through for much of the day. And as we did so, looming larger in the distance, this long line of mountains which Philby said stretched up to 6,000 feet altitude, Jebel Damk. And that was our target yesterday. We reached there about an hour and a half before sunset, and I have to say it was probably so far the most beautiful campsite we've had on the journey. It's rained a lot. You know, those of you following the podcast will know that we had a lot of rain on the first day, and it's clearly rained a lot here too. We camped in the bottom of a wadi bed last night in a valley between these high mountains. The ground around was quite muddy still, but we were able to find some low gravel terraces onto which we put our tents and our tables to settle down for a beautiful night under some large acacia trees. Beautiful spot. Ravens, crag martins, more shrikes, eagles, a couple of old ancient burial mounds on the top of the mountains above us looking down, and a lovely sunset and almost no moon now. Just a sliver of a crescent which will disappear, we think, probably tonight or tomorrow. So the stars last night were absolutely amazing. Jupiter, Venus and Saturn were all very, very bright in the sky. It's the first completely clear night we've had, so a star-filled sky all night, not a single cloud in any direction. So it was a beautiful night, several degrees warmer because the wind has shifted, so everyone was much more comfortable. So after we'd sat around the fire for an hour last night, excuse me, talking about Philby, we all wriggled into various sleeping bags and settled down for a lovely and well-deserved night's sleep. And you know, the wet ground was an issue for Philby too when he was travelling. Camels don't like travelling on wet ground, and their pads give them no grip at all, and if they slip on the mud, and it does get very, very muddy, it sticks to vehicle tyres so much that the wheels won't even go around under the arches. It's just like wallpaper paste and porridge all mixed together. So it's horrible stuff to drive over. It's even worse to ride a camel over, because A, the camels sink, they don't like that sinking feeling, but also it sticks to their pads on their feet. But also if they slip and lose their balance, there's absolutely no way you're going to get it up again, because you can't get a vehicle anywhere near it in that with that ground surface. And I recall the camels we had loaned to us from the Royal Oman Cavalry many years ago when we crossed the empty quarter from Salalah to Doha. Those camels were worth about £15,000 each, and we had 4 of them. So there were a lot of money to lose and to abandon. So, you know, travelling through such terrain is very difficult, but it has its advantages, and Philby commented in his book. So Philby, Alan and the team are now, they have an old black and white photograph taken by Philby in 1917. Whilst I'm doing this podcast, they're out now zigzagging around trying to find the exact spot where he stood to take that photograph of Jebel Damk. But there were advantages for Filby. You know, if you come to a water hole when you're driving through sand desert, it can take half a day to lower a goatskin bag down a well and water your camels, most of it leaking out by the time you've pulled the goatskin up to the surface of the well. But because there was such plentiful water in puddles, the camels were able to drink and take their fill as they travelled. So they were able to, they weren't losing so much time. So I guess that was a bonus. A couple of days ago, we said farewell to 3 lads from the Saudi press agency who'd been with us from when we set off from Riyadh. And one of them was a wonderful poet, Talal Al-Anazi, and Talal would serenade us with poems around the fire and as we were walking. And poor Reem is exhausted having to translate all this, but you know, he spoke about his faith in God and how his time here on earth is only temporary, but therefore he wants to be as good a person as he can in that time. But he also spoke about how he found peace and serenity being out in the desert and the simplicity of life. And I think that's what motivates the 4 of us, Anna, Reem, Alan and myself. We all enjoy the environment in which we're living and travelling. And you know, some sad news reached me the other day that a friend of a very good friend of mine sadly took their own life at the tender age of in the 20s, which is far too young for anything like that. And it just made me ponder and reflect on on the value of the outdoors for our mental health and our mental well-being. And you know, there's more and more evidence out there of the more time we spend in nature, the better it is for our mental health, and how modern society is actually taking us away from that nature connectedness. So we are totally immersed in nature here. So and it does give you wonderful time to reflect, and it's a great place for not just putting things into context, but also, you know, just reflecting and planning ahead, and just putting things into their rightful place, and issues that seem big issues after a couple of days out here, really, you know what, they're not such big issues after all. And if I think of an organisation that does incredible work with young people, using wilderness and wild places to develop not necessarily future skills and resilience, but just to enable them to come up with a toolkit to overcome challenges in their lives. It's an organisation called the Wilderness Foundation in the UK, and I think they're based somewhere down in the southeast Essex or Kent, and it's run by an extraordinary lady called Jo Roberts. And I met Jo many years ago. We spoke together at a World Wilderness Congress lecture in Salamanca in Spain. And Salamanca University in Spain prides itself on being one of the oldest universities in the world. But I was able to correct that by pointing out that the humble fireplace around which we sat last night is much, much older. And for thousands of years, people have sat around the fireplace in the desert, discussing issues, resolving disputes, and just putting the world to rights, really. So as far as I'm concerned, we are at when we sit around that fireplace, we are gathered at the University of the Desert. And Jo Roberts, it does some brilliant stuff with really underprivileged young people in Britain, taking them outdoors, taking them to Scotland, well out of their comfort zones, where they just develop a bit of self-esteem and self-confidence. And Jo is a past master at this. So I was able to send one of my fantastic staff at Outward Bound Oman, Sakina El Haddad. Sakina was lucky enough to go to UK, and she travelled with Jo and her team, and a team of young people, to Scotland. They spent 5 days on expedition in Scotland, and Sakina was able to take that experience and to translate it back here to where I live and work in Oman. And now we use the desert as a place to address mental well-being issues. And I know back in Oman the team are busy running courses now for young people whose houses and homes were devastated by a cyclone that clattered into the coast of Oman several years ago. So, the outdoors is a pretty unique place to be able to try and resolve internal conflict. And I think when I listened to Jo Roberts talking, she got her inspiration from an extraordinary man called Dr. Ian Player. And, I'm 61, and when I grew up, there was a guy playing golf called Gary Player, who was a bit of a pin-up superstar at the time in the golfing world. And but his brother was much less well known, but doing much greater things, in my opinion, because his brother, Dr. Ian Player, was a white South African. His best mate was a Zulu guy, and together they'd just go into the bush and they would sit on a rock and use the simplicity but the power of nature just to try and work out where South Africa was going wrong, where apartheid was going. And they didn't just talk about negativity, they tried to find a solution, and that solution was to create something called the Wilderness Leadership School. And together they took mixed groups of black and white young people from South Africa into the bush for 5 or 6 days for what was an incredibly transformative experience. Initially, the two groups would not even speak to each other. But when you realise that the only thing that's going to keep the hyenas away at night is that if one of you sits up and keeps the fire lit and keeps that fire burning, and you're going to take it in turns, an hour at a time, then slowly the trust and the friendship develops. And that great idea, that germ of an idea, has really flourished. The Wilderness Leadership School, I think in the old days it was around the Umfolozi River, where they used to do these, what they call wilderness trails. Very, very successful. Part of the healing of South Africa, and I know Jo uses that a lot for her inspiration for the great work that she does with the Wilderness Foundation in the UK, and we've tried to learn from that and bring that learning to the deserts of Oman. And in addition to a place to work out what's going on in your own head, it's a great place to take young people away from the distractions of everyday life, away from computers, away from phones. So it's a great place for peace building too, and that's a great project that we have done over the years in Oman. A big project now endorsed by UNESCO and the United Nations Alliance of Civilizations in New York. And it was this concept of the University of the Desert that developed into a program that now has several hundred alumni. We take fantastically motivated young people, not necessarily academically gifted, but people who we believe can make a difference to society in the future. And we'll have 18 people from 18 different nations, half from Arab states, half from sort of inverted commas Western world. So you might have a young Brit sitting next to a young Iranian, sitting next to a young American, sitting next to a young Yemeni, and so on. And it makes for an incredibly rich experience. I was a teacher for 20 years, and those 5 days on the courses at University of the Desert are the most powerful thing I've ever seen educationally. Pride of place in my home in Muscat is a Nansen sled. It's about 5 or 6 meters long. It's a beautiful wooden sled. It came with me to the Arctic. I believe it's the only one probably in the Middle East. Why else would you have a sled in the Middle East? But this sled comes from Antarctica, and it was given to me by a very famous polar explorer called Jeff Summers, who is absolutely legendary. Jeff was one of the last people to drive dog teams in Antarctica. And when Jeff found out that I was going to the Arctic for a year, he very kindly took me out to his garage, showed me this Nansen sled that he'd driven in Antarctica, which he'd lovingly dismantled and stored very carefully. I took that to Tetbury in Gloucestershire. A man called Roger Daines reassembled it for me, put new runners on the bottom. So that sled was with me for a year in the Arctic. So when I came out to Oman 18 years ago, I couldn't bear to leave it. So it now occupies pride of place in my lounge in Muscat. But that sled is the design of an explorer, a Norwegian explorer. The Norwegians know one or two things about travelling in snow. Of a man called Fridtjof Nansen. And Nansen was an incredible polar explorer who went on to be a great diplomat and even a Nobel Prize winner. And it was Nansen that said something along the lines of, I tell you, deliverance will not come from the noisy, rushing centres of civilization. The solutions will come from the lonely places. And I believe what he's saying there is the same as Kurt Hahn, Gordonstoun, creator of Outward Bound, is saying when he says that any Outward Bound course has to have a time within the course where people can sit down and try and make sense of it all, make sense of all the learning that's going on. So in Outward Bound terms, we call that the solo. And I think what Nansen is saying is exactly that. You know, we're so immersed and surrounded by noise, that we all need time to step out of that noise and to put life in perspective. And from those places where you think and have the space to think, then the solutions will come. So the next day for us now, we're going to plough on. Now, Reem and I have walked this morning around the base of Jebel Dank. We're now just searching for the location where Philby took his photograph in 1917. We're then just Alan and Anna have now called us up, and we're going to jump in the vehicles to cover a bit of ground onto tonight's campsite. And tonight, I'm told, is going to be even more beautiful than last night. So, and that's going to take some beating. So I think we're going to have no signal for the next few days, so we will keep the podcast going. So it might be a bit of a gap before you hear the next one.